being on the show.
It is a pleasure to be with you today, Jay.
So I'm really excited to have you on today because as I started to look at your books and your content ahead of time, something really caught my eye, and it's actually right behind you there, which is smart if you're watching the video, is this idea of noble purpose. So before we talk about you and your story and entrepreneurship and all that kind of stuff, I'd love to just kick off with that. What does noble purpose mean and why does it matter?
Your noble purpose in business is how you make a difference to your customers. And why it matters is without clarity about the noble purpose of your business, you wind up just becoming another transactional Me Too organization. And I realize Me Too means something different now. Another transaction. Right. That's a whole other topic.
That's right. We're not talking about that today.
Yeah, you wind up becoming a transactional, non-differentiated organization.
So let's talk about differentiation just as an idea. I hear this a lot with people because they come to us as we're working on marketing messaging and things like that. And obviously that matters a lot, but they always will say like, you know, we need help figure out what the one thing is that differentiates us. And I actually believe there's rarely one thing that differentiates people. Usually it's a combination of things that creates a unique identity. So talk to me about like your view of differentiation and how people can kind of find that noble purpose or find what sets them apart so they are unique and noticeable in the marketplace.
So if you're looking to find your noble purpose, there are three things that we call them the three discovery questions. And we've used these with organizations around the world, large and small, entrepreneurs to very major corporations. And the questions are these. How do you make a difference to your customers? How do you do it differently than your competition? And on your best day, what do you love about your job? And the reason we ask those three questions and we ask them in that way is it gets beyond just the generic value proposition. And when we say, how do you do it differently? It gets to what you were saying. You may not have a better widget, but the way you interact with customers, the way you service, the way you care, there may be a whole lot of nuanced things that you do that make you stand out because everyone can't have a breakthrough product. And the great news is you don't have to.
Yeah, you know, I think that's really interesting because you're right. Everybody doesn't have a new Tesla, you know, that they're selling.
Right.
We're not all Elon Musks, which is probably good. It would be probably a pretty crazy world if we were. But there's a lot of people out there that are selling things, if you will, or services that they have a lot of competition. Other people do what they do, right? I mean, there's a lot of other people that do marketing and do application development like we do, that there's thousands of them, you know, probably tens of thousands all over the world. And I love those three questions. I just want to kind of read them back and make sure I have them right here. How do you make a difference to your customers? How do you do it differently than your competition? Sometimes I can't read my own handwriting. And on your best day, why do you love it? Is that a pretty good analysis of what those three were?
That's it. And I can tell you when you talk about differentiation, I'll give you an example of a company we work with that's a concrete company, okay? And they have become differentiated in their space. And it's a company called Foundation Support Works, and they're out of Omaha, Nebraska. So, you know, take that in. Construction company, Omaha, concrete, a lot of things that you would not think would be differentiated. But what they decided in our work with them is they decided that they were going to redefine their entire industry. They do, like if your basement floods, you know, they pour new concrete, shore it up. And they do have some patented products, but the real differentiator when they said, how do we do it differently, is they came up with a big list of things that they were going to do to redefine the customer's expectations around callback times, around every quote being, you know, held firm to, around the way they show up and how neat they are, like a series of seemingly small things. But this is a company that now has been voted a best place to work. Their Yelp and Nextdoor reviews are off the grid because they said we are going to redefine our entire industry. And so they've accomplished the two things that every businesses need: competitive differentiation and emotional engagement.
That's so good. And that's such a great example because it's not a you know, for lack of a better term, it's not a sexy business,
Not
right?
sexy,
Concrete
right.
construction, like there's a
Right.
lot of companies that do those kinds of things, but what makes them stand out? It's such an interesting thing because I think especially in today's environment of marketing and social media and 24/7 news cycles and everything else, it seems like it should be easier than ever to get attention, but I actually think it's harder than ever because there's so much noise. And so breaking through that noise requires clarity in message, and it requires, you know, understanding what separates you from everybody else. And I'll always tell people too, I think a lot of companies focus a little too much on their competition. Like we need to know what separates us, but I always think too, like what I care about the most, the number one person I want to compete with is me from last year. The number one person I want our team to compete with is us from last year, because like everybody else can do their own thing. We have our own vision and plan of how we want to accomplish them. I think there's actually more to learn half the time from competition than there is to be afraid of.
Well, if you notice on those 3 questions, the first one is how do you make a difference to customers?
Yeah.
And we ask it really importantly in that way because a lot of people, we work with a lot of tech firms and they will have a value proposition that we've got this, we've got this, we've got this. And that's great. It's a good starting point. But until I can get their salespeople to articulate how do I make a difference to my customers in really concrete terms, they're not going to be emotionally engaging. And
talk a little bit more about that idea of emotional engagement, because I think this is really important. In marketing messaging, we talk a lot about why people buy. And they buy primarily because of how they feel about something. And a lot of times when I start talking to executives or business leaders, they go, well, we're getting a little too like, I don't know, flowery here, talking about how people feel. I'm like, no. This is why people buy stuff. Like, do you want them to buy? Yes or no? Yes, of course they do. So talk to me about this idea of emotional engagement, kind of what you mean by that and why it matters.
Well, it's crucial. You can't create emotional engagement with your customers unless you have an emotionally engaged team. It will not happen. You won't have passionate customers unless you have passionate people. So a couple things you have to understand. Belief drives behavior, which drives results. So when we work with organizations, if a group of salespeople believes that their primary purpose is to close the deal, sounds good in theory, certainly better than my primary purpose is to lay in bed all day. But if they believe that their primary purpose is to close the deal, they will exhibit very transactional, graspy behaviors. And especially in a B2B sale in a virtual environment, it will be very off-putting to your customers. So instead, what you want to seed in your people is the belief that their product, their solution makes a difference to customers. And I don't mean this to be manipulative or lying. I mean, if you have an existing business, you are improving customers or they wouldn't be buying from you. And so, for example, we have a bank that we work with, the Atlantic Capital Bank. They're featured in the book and the CEO's on our website. And they decided that their noble purpose was we fuel prosperity. So what happens is all their people are organized around, we make a difference. We're fueling prosperity for all of our customers. We're helping businesses succeed. We're helping homeowners, achieve their dream. So they've built this belief. Their team becomes differentiated because see, people have, once we get beyond food and shelter, we have 2 fundamental needs: belonging and significance. We want to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and we want to make a difference. And if you have a numbers only narrative, close it, let's drive revenue, yours is about building a business that lasts. Your business will not last because people will tire of that.
Yeah, this is really important. I think I just want to kind of repeat one of the things you said there. If you want to have passionate customers, you got to have a passionate team. I just believe that so much. And what you're talking about now is really when people do this poorly, when they're just doing things to close deals, when they're just doing it for the dollars. Those people are ultimately why, I hate even that term, those people, but still, those people are the reason that, people don't like salespeople.
That's right.
And they don't want to be salespeople because we've all encountered that.
By the people who are doing it badly.
That's right. And what I always say to people is if you really believe that your product or service is going to make somebody else's life better, well, number one, if you don't believe that, you shouldn't be selling it. But number two, if you really believe that, I think you're morally obligated to convince them to buy it because you're doing what's in their best interest. Persuasion is not inherently bad if you're persuading something to someone that is actually going to help them. It's only bad when it's manipulative and you're trying to make them do something that's not actually in their best interest. It's primarily in your best interest. And I always say the best kind of business, especially B2B, but really in all scenarios, is the kind of business where everybody wins. And that is possible. It is possible for my marketing agency to thrive and the business that we're helping to thrive, because if we're helping them grow, everybody wins. And that's great.
Well, you're right. It's not just possible in today's climate, it's required, because guess what? There's this little thing called the internet, and your customers are going to be talking about you. And even if you are not a consumer business where you're going to get evaluated on your Yelp reviews, your customers are part of users groups. They are going to talk about you. And so what you're saying is the data actually backs this up. So the reason we launched Selling with Noble Purpose is it all started with a single study that we did with a big biotech company. And what we discovered, we were trying to discern the difference between the average performers and the top performers when it came to sales. And what we found was the top performers were not just interested in money. Money matters, but these top performers, the story in their head was, I'm making a difference to customers. So much so that we were able to discern that these noble purpose sellers, these people who, quote, we called sold with noble purpose, whose primary aim was to make a difference to customers, they outsold their counterparts. They sold bigger deals. They sold stickier deals. And here's the interesting thing. They were actually more assertive. But they were assertive because they believed versus aggressive because I need. And customers can read the difference, especially on a Zoom call when all the little handshaky and coffees are out the window. They are reading they can read intent. And so what we discerned was that these noble purpose sellers outperformed their average counterparts. But over the course of 10 years, what we found is that these average performing folks weren't bad people at all. They were just drawn because organizationally the narrative of the business was close the deal, close the deal, close the deal. They didn't have this core of noble purpose telling them a different story. But what we found is you can actually teach it, so you can scale it. But you have to be proactive as a leader about infusing that noble purpose into your people on a regular basis.
So one of the things I'm thinking about as you're talking through this is we talk a lot about core values, mission statements, vision statements, things like that. And it's actually stuff that I used to always believe was just for big corporations. I didn't think that entrepreneurs and small businesses needed those things. And I was exceptionally wrong about that. And I've learned, I mean, you can see I've got them ours drawn up on the wall behind me. That's how important they are to us now, because they create a guiding light. So what I'm curious about is how you would differentiate something as specific as having like a noble purpose and like the more traditional phrasing of things like core values, mission, and vision. Like, what's the differentiation between those two, since we're talking about differentiation?
So I'll start with the easy one. Core values are how you behave. They're the guardrails in your behavior. The difference and when it comes to noble purpose versus mission and vision, words only mean what we think they mean. The thing that I see with most mission and vision statements basically boil down to, we want to find a way to be the leader, to make more money, serve our community. So basically what they're saying is we want to find a way to make money off our business model and be nice. And there's nothing wrong with that. Find a way to make money and be nice people. If the world operated by that, we'd be good. But what we do differently with noble purpose is your noble purpose succinctly describes your aim in your lane, your aspiration, the difference you're trying to make to your customers, and to some degree, your lane. So for example, we fuel prosperity was this particular customer's noble purpose. And so what that means is when a seller is with a customer, their job is to find out, what does prosperity mean to this customer and how can I get them there? What can I do? If I'm a product developer, how can I help people with their prosperity? And what's interesting is a lot of times people think noble purpose means we'll just give away the store, give away lots to charity.
Mm.
And what we found, noble purpose companies outperform the market by about 350%.
Wow.
And while they are good corporate citizens, that's not the differentiator. The differentiator is at the center of their model. Their commercial strategy is, here's how we improve life for customers. And that's the driving force of the organization. And you can look at tons of examples. Blockbuster, at one point they were that, then they became, how can we make more money off our stores? Netflix says, how can we provide great entertainment? Two totally different North Stars. One had the money and one had customer impact. And we know how that worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. I just love this stuff because I think it has such an impact on people, and yet it's so easy to put on the shelf. That's the problem. It's so easy to go, you know what, we'll get to that. You know what, we got real problems to deal with, like our P&L. We got real problems to deal with, like this new staff member we got to let go, or this other staff member we need to hire, or whatever it is. And yet I think if people would take the time to do these things and figure out what their noble purpose is, figure out what their core values are, figure out why they do what they do, if they would take time to put those to paper and then communicate that to everyone else, so everybody else knows what it is. And ultimately, if the rest of the team isn't on board with that, you have a real problem. Like they need to believe, like you said, that where the ship is headed is somewhere they want to go.
And that their work matters. They
right.
need belonging and significance. And you're right. This is important, but it never feels urgent. And so I would say, imagine, I used to not use parenting examples for two reasons. One, because I thought it made me look less of a business person. And two, because my children were so young, I didn't have full confidence. I don't know well. But now I realize leadership is leadership wherever you practice it. And both my kids have graduated from college, so I did that well enough. So the reason I'm using this as an example is, imagine the difference between a parent who every day just shows up to manage the crisis of the moment. And it's better than not showing up.
Sure.
Okay. And they might be kind-hearted and whatever. Imagine the difference between that parent versus a parent that takes a couple of hours one day to decide, what kind of people am I trying to raise here? What kind of difference am I trying to make? And when you decide as a parent that you're trying to raise compassionate, forthright leaders that are going to make a difference in the world, and you hold that as your North Star, everything changes. Everything changes. And it is the same parallel in business. When that company said, we're going to redefine our industry, that's how they scaled. They have dealers all over the country who've signed up for that. Yeah. That's how they become a best place to work. That's how the lowest person in the organization knows what to do when the boss isn't there. Because in the long run, it saves you tons of time. Because you can't, we see all these people scripting out checklists and all this. Those are fine. But at the end of the day, you've got to have something that your people know they stand for, or they can't make decisions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I think the parenting example is great. We've been talking about this at home recently because we just built a new house and we just moved in literally last week. So it's crazy town right now. And I have 5 kids who range from 7 to 15 years old. Yeah, it's an adventure. And so I was saying to my wife the other day, actually after another podcast, we were talking about how things like mission and vision and values can relate to the home. And I thought, man, I've got my core values for work drawn up on the wall. Why don't we have those at our house? Like, why haven't we decided? I mean, I think we think we know what those things are, but we've not written them down. And I go, man, we need to take some time for that. So once we get the boxes unpacked, one of our plans is to set aside some time to literally sit down as a family and go, hey, what is our North Star? Where are we going? What is our noble purpose? What is our focus? And we're going to draw it on the wall. Because we need to be reminded of that in all situations. The kids need to be reminded of it. We need to be reminded of it too, especially in those stressful moments of, raising 5 children. My wife homeschools all 5 kids too. So she has her hands full and having that clarity of like, why are we doing what we're doing? Because otherwise it can feel like you're just going through the monotony of life at home and at work.
Especially now. And one of the things that we found was, there was a study from Michigan State University that we included in the book, And Dr. Valerie Good discovered that when salespeople, and this applies to anyone, when salespeople have that sense of noble purpose, not only do they put forth more effort, but they're better able to rebound from setbacks. And this is the thing that we're seeing now with a lot of our clients. Teams that have clarity about how they make a difference to customers are more resilient. Because if my total ethos, my ego, my definition of myself rises and falls with every sale, oh my gosh, what a roller coaster I'd be on now.
Yeah.
But instead, you want a sales team that defines themselves by making a difference to customers. Then a setback is just that. It's
Right.
a setback. It's a time to learn. It's a time to regroup. It's a time to trot out that story of how we made a difference last week and remind ourselves that we can still do it. So it really affects resilience. And I mean, you look at that, we have grown people now whose parents' voice are ringing in their ears.
Oh yeah.
And if your parents' voice ringing in your ears is saying, don't do that, don't wear that, don't draw attention to yourself, you're going to behave one way. But if your parents' voice ringing in your ears says you're a resilient person who can figure things out, then I'm going to respond totally differently. That same thing applies to your employees, because next to your immediate family, your boss is the second most important person. Their voice is ringing in your ears. So you want to be feeding your people a steady diet, not of fluffy praise, but of here's how we make a difference. Here's why our customers need us. Here's why what our work matters. Because I want that in their head when they're going out to do their work.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I think it's so important. I usually start the show by asking people to kind of tell me a little bit about their entrepreneurial journey and where they came from and how they, got to where they are. But I just felt like this noble purpose thing was such a great thing to start on. It's very tactical and something people really need to pay attention to. But let's rewind a little bit. You've been developing these ideas for a long time, and you've got multiple books on the subject. So where did that come from? What does that journey look like from the beginning? What led you down this path to focusing on noble purpose as your primary kind of cause, if you will?
So there's two routes. The first, the more obvious one is I spent a lot of years as a sales consultant, which technically I still am, but I was a VP of sales for a large sales consultancy, and we did a lot of sales training, sales coaching. And I consistently observed that people would buy in when the stakes were low, when they were in a classroom. They would say, yeah, focus on the customer, ask these great questions, coach your salespeople to focus on the customer, and no one's going to disagree with that. But what I consistently observed was when the stakes were high, when there was a deal on the table, when we weren't going to make the month and we weren't going to make the quarter, all the emphasis on the customer was gone. And instead it became hit the number. And I saw what that created for people, that in many cases they did hit the number. I saw what that created for people. And so I knew I had to find a way to solve that problem, to keep them focused on the customer even when the stakes were high. So that's sort of the business version. The more personal version is I had two parents, and one of my parents loved their job and one of my parents hated their job. And I saw what a difference it made in our family. And so I grew up with this belief that when you love your job, everything changes. Everything changes. And as I got into my work, I saw that was certainly true for myself, because like many people, I've had these highs and lows. And what I came to see was it wasn't just loving your job like this, find your bliss, go on a mountaintop and paint. It was this hardwiring that we want to know we make a difference. And what I realized is when you give a human being that, when they know that their work counts for something, you don't have to create world peace, you don't have to cure cancer. If these concrete guys know, man, your basement is fixed and it's fixed forever. When they know that they're giving these people peace of mind, when the bank knows that they're helping people sleep better at night, when you know that, your whole life lights up and you become better at everything. You might be exhausted at the end of the day, but it's not that drained, exhausted, like, God, what did I even do? And so I saw, for me, the other place that this work comes from is from this deep personal sense that I have around wanting people to feel more meaning in their life. And it's no coincidence. My favorite movie is It's a Wonderful Life, where the guy all of a sudden realizes, oh my gosh, I wasn't just slogging away. Turns out I made a difference.
It's interesting. I was just thinking about this story that somebody told me one time, and the story was basically somebody walked up to some guys who were laying bricks. The concrete made me think of this. Laying
Yeah.
bricks at a cathedral, and the guy asked the first guy, "Hey, what are you doing?" He goes, "Well, I'm laying bricks." And he asked the next guy, "What are you doing?" And he said, "Well, I'm building a wall." So he had a little bit more purpose than the first guy, because he actually was trying to create something. It wasn't just laying bricks. Then he asked the third guy, he said, "What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm building a worship center for the glory of God." And it's like, wow, because
I want
all of a
that guy.
sudden, like they're all three doing the same thing. They're all three laying bricks.
Yeah.
But the purpose, the reason of why they're doing it is so much different that I have to believe that the third guy had so much more joy and satisfaction in life, even though he was doing the exact same work. I always tell our team, if we just believed that we were just putting pixels on screens and writing words, if that's all we did, that is not that exciting.
It's not.
It's
Well,
not. But if we believe that what we're doing is helping other people grow their businesses, if we believe that what we're doing is help other people achieve their dreams, if we believe that what we're doing is helping other people create a life that they never could have otherwise, wow, that's a whole different ball game than putting pixels on a screen or writing words.
Well, and there's two things I want people to take away from that story. Number one, you were at absolute choice about your mental talk track.
Yeah.
Okay. But number two, if you're a leader, you can affect that mental talk track.
Mm-hmm.
So every morning, we're building a cathedral, because here's what we know. We're all going to have our bricklayer days. We know that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But what we know is the more cathedral building days you have, you will perform better. You will be more energized by your work. If you deal with customers, you will create a more engaging relationship with your customers. And from a leadership perspective, not only are people who think that way higher performers, they will stick with your company longer. They stay. Because why would they look elsewhere? Right. We build cathedrals. I don't want to look elsewhere.
Right.
And so it's really important for individual performers to know you have power to reset that towards your noble purpose. But it's also important for leadership to know that only about 10% of people is that their default. You want to find and hire those people, but only about 10% is their default. But what our data tells us is about 70% can get there. Wow. If you infuse it every day. I think back to the parenting, in a long slog of parenting, I could sure use somebody telling me on Monday morning, it's, as you look at that list, it's a long week, but you know what you were doing now is you were shaping future leaders. And these people are going to take these things that you're doing and the way that you're doing them, and they're going to go out there. How do I feel now? I can do this thing. Yeah. It takes what is implicit and makes it explicit, and people need that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, one of the big mistakes that I make in this is I do think that when I do it, I'm pretty good at it. But the problem is I often will be like, well, I've said that before. I've said, right. and it needs to be said over and over and over and over again for ourselves as leaders, but for everyone else's sake too. I think it's also easy. Like for me, one of the mistakes I make is forgetting, like, everybody hasn't been here all 21 years. Some people have only been here 6 months. They don't know all the stories. And even though I've told the stories 10 times, they need to hear them 10 more times, because that is what's gotten us to where we are ultimately. And so how are we going to get to where we're going? Well, we need more of that, but even probably on overdrive.
Well, and you're successful at it when your employees say, oh, I know, there goes Jay again. We make a difference, and he's going to trot out that story, that consulting firm that says it's in there. Right. I will tell you one thing that you can do in an organization. One of our companies is Blackbaud, one of our noble purpose companies. They're a software company out of Charleston, South Carolina. been voted a best place to work. CEO was top 50 innovative CEOs, and they are a fairly large company. They're a publicly traded company, so you can do this despite the pressures of quarterly capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things they did when they launched their Noble Purpose Journey was they have software developers all sit in a room. They put up pictures of their clients on the wall and said, every day when you come in, this is who you're developing for. They brought in clients to tell stories about how they used the software and how it helped them. And sure enough, about a year into that, they had a couple of product innovation breakthroughs. Because when those people were sitting there thinking, how can I help the customers do their job better? That's where the innovation comes from. It doesn't come from everybody sitting around going, how can we make a better widget?
Right.
And so the more that's infused into the business, one of the things I often do with executives is we'll look at the transcripts from their meetings, especially publicly traded companies, and we'll gauge how much of the time you're talking about your internal numbers and how much of the time you're talking about customers. Mm-hmm. And if you're over 50% of the time on your internal numbers, it's a danger zone.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. We always talk about, from a marketing messaging perspective, the big mistake people make often is they start talking about themselves first. But this is true internally as well from a communication standpoint, because I always say that the number one thing we need to start with from a messaging perspective is, what does the customer want? Mm-hmm. What do they actually want? They probably don't even necessarily want your product or service. They want the outcome that it provides. Yeah. And they want that because they have some kind of a problem, right? And so what is that problem? And how do they feel about it? And what do they believe about it? And if we know those things, then we can lead them with empathy and authority to help give them a clear plan to help them win the day. But if we don't know those things and we just start talking about ourselves, but it's easy to do, man. I used to do this all the time. We started a business in 1999 and I was 17 years old and blah, blah, blah. And I tell my whole story, and it's a great story and it has value. It's just often in the wrong place. It doesn't belong at the beginning. The customer belongs at the beginning. Mine belongs somewhere else when I need to implant authority to prove that I'm the best one or we're the best one to help them win the day. And that's
exactly right.
That's
we talk in the book about backstory and when to tell your backstory. So I'll give you an example of the difference between talking about yourself versus talking about the customer, and it made $1 billion difference.
Wow.
Pet food wars, we all know. Purina, the most well-known company, but Mars Pet Care also has pet food. And Purina said that their purpose was better with pets. Mars said their purpose was a better world for pets. They sound the same, but they are completely different. The people at Mars decided that their purpose was, their noble purpose, I would say, was to make a better world for pets. Whereas Purina is saying, we believe in life is better with pets. I'm sure they're a lovely company. I haven't worked with them. But the reason that Mars was able to overtake them, like Mars became dominant in the space, Mars went into pet healthcare, because Mars is sitting around a table saying, how can we make a better world for pets? And that prompts all kinds of things. And it doesn't mean we give everything away. They're a very generous company, but it means, what about pet health? What about this? What about that? And so you start to think of all these ideas, and you can filter them through. How expensive are they going to be?
Sure.
Can we win in this space? You can filter them through all those things. But the first question you ask to start generating them is, how can we make a better world for pets? That's what generates the ideas. And so that's the difference between how can we make a difference to customer focus versus a well-intended internal focus. And it all starts with the words.
Yeah, I was saying something kind of similar to somebody yesterday. I was on one of my mastermind calls with some other leaders, and they were struggling with trying to get their internal team, pretty large team, to kind of have buy-in in this big technology shift that they were doing, moving from one piece of software to the other. And then number one, they were just allowing them to stay on the old software indefinitely and making that decision themselves. So they had set no deadline. There was all kind of problems. But irregardless of that, the big thing that had the real impact was crafting the story that we were going to tell to them in a way that makes the team member who needs to make that change know that it's for them. This is in their best interest. It's not just in the company's best interest. Because we lead with, well, the company needs this and the company wants that. They don't care about that unless it has impact for them and their lives and their purpose. And so that communication is true across the board. And I think leadership needs to know that and be able to communicate that, especially, people that are maybe even running small businesses. They think about growing a team, hiring that first employee. If I knew a lot of this stuff at the very beginning, I would have saved a lot of heartache probably over a decade of figuring it out myself.
You and me both, my friend. And a lot of what I have brought to bear is my own ethos.
Sure.
Which is what I thought for a long time were these two seemingly competing ideas in my head. Mm-hmm. And one was, I wanted to be successful. I was very competitive and I wanted to make a lot of money. And the other was, maybe I should have been a school teacher or a pastor. I really want to help people.
Right.
And it took me a long time to realize, and I discovered it with this study we did of this biotech company, and then subsequent studies where I discovered, this inclination I had, being drawn to sales wasn't at odds with this inclination I had to want to, be a preschool teacher or pastor.
Right.
They're the same. And it took me a long time to get there. And where I finally landed was the data backs it up. When organizations have this purpose bigger than money, they outperform the competition. They create more lasting relationships with their customers. They become a best place to work. I mean, we have customers that have literally doubled their revenue and become best one. Like one of our clients is on the cover of American Banker, Banker of the Year, because they were able to combine the money and the meaning. And that's where the magic is. And that's what people want, especially now, because all these people are working remotely. If they're not working remotely, your customers are working remotely. They don't have time for a transactional business. Mm-hmm. They need people who can really help them.
Yeah, I think that idea, I love what you said there, of like it is possible to combine money and meaning. Those things are not inherently at odds with one another. They can be, but they're not inherently at odds. And it's funny, you're talking about just different paths and where you should go. Years ago, I actually thought I was supposed to be a pastor at one point, and did all kind of stuff. And I ended up meeting with another business leader who runs an agency similar to mine. And he preaches occasionally, actually, but he's not actually a pastor. It's not his job. Yeah. And he looked at me at a lunch and he said, what makes you think you need to be in ministry to be in ministry? And I was like, oh, right. Because he said, look, good work is ministry. Good work is caring for other people. Good work is doing good. And in fact, if your name doesn't say pastor after it, maybe you can have a little bit more impact in people's lives because they don't change their behavior when you walk in the room just because of your title. And I'm like, wow, okay.
And you've got to meet people where they are. And one of the things that we've seen, over the course, it's been really a privilege to watch some of these companies and become and be voted best places to work, which isn't just an award. It means your employees voted for you. Yeah. And if you think about the ripple effect of that, if all of a sudden, I mean, one of our customers has 60,000 employees. If you've got 60,000 employees who really love their job, you've just changed the lives of, do it a 10x. Right. You've just changed the lives of their spouse, their kids, their parents, their neighbors. Because when that person loves their job and they're excited about it, yeah, they sell more. Yeah, they bring that to work, but they also bring it home. And it's life-changing. And those are the companies also that we're seeing that have the tenacity and resilience to get through this current crisis.
Yeah, absolutely. That gave me chill bumps just thinking about it because I just think it's so true. Well, we're running out of time, so I want to cover three really important things that I
Okay.
always kind of land the plane with on the show. The first one is going to be around the topic of work-life balance. It means something different to everybody, but I think a lot of what we've talked about really applies heavily to this topic. And the second is where people can find you online or learn more about your books. And the third is any kind of parting advice for building a business that lasts. Let's start with the first one. Work-life balance. It means something different to everybody. What does it mean to you, and how has that changed through different seasons of life?
I've had a lot of different seasons. I actually started my business because I was a 70-hour week on the airplane every week, VP of sales.
Mm.
And I had a baby. And that was back in the days when you didn't go to your boss and say, hey, let's work something different out. And so that's why I started my own consulting practice so that I could do high level, high impact work 3 days a week. And I did that for a decade. And so to me, the idea of work-life balance doesn't work because it says that I've got this compartment and this compartment, and it particularly doesn't work I'll just say for women, because it also kind of suggests that we should be two different people in two different places. So for me, what works better is taking the values and principles that I have and choosing where to spend my time for this season of my life. I'm now back to where I'm working all the time, and I love it because my children are grown. My oldest daughter's an industrial psychologist. She works with me in the business, and she's the co-author on the book. So now I work all the time, and it's like super exciting. And that's one thing I wish someone had told me, the young me, that you can have a fantastic career, even if you spend a decade sort of just keeping it afloat.
Yeah, I think that is such good counsel. Right now, I feel like we just live in such a world of extremes in so many areas, which I won't get into. But I think this work-life balance thing is one of those, where I think there's some people out there who say, like, if you're not working on, I mean, I said Elon Musk earlier, he said this before, if you're not working 100 hours a week, you're barely working. Yeah. And then there's others who kind of take they fall off I have pastors used to say people usually fall off one cliff or the other. So Elon falls off this cliff over here to me, and then other people fall off this other one where, like, if you're not taking 3 naps during the day and having 2 yoga breaks, then you're not living appropriately. And I always tell people, I agree with you. I don't think there's balance. I think it's just seasonal. And I think that in, my early years of business, when I was in my early 20s and, I'd just gotten married and my wife was busy and we didn't have kids, and like I could work as many hours as I want, and I liked it. That did not burn me out. That was good. I enjoyed that. There was nothing wrong with wanting to work a lot. If you love your work, that's amazing. And I wasn't neglecting other people around me as a result of that. At least I hope I wasn't. But then now, like with 5 kids, it's not the same. And so I still work plenty, but I have to put systems and processes and people in place in order for the company to keep thriving and for clients to be taken care of, because I can't do all that. And I just love that reality. Like, you can take a break in a season and then come back to that in the future as well. So last 2 things. Number one, where can people find you online? Where can they find more about your book?
sellingwithnoblepurpose.com.
Well, that's very easy. So sellingwithnoblepurpose.com, definitely check that out if you love these ideas, which I think that most of you listening or watching will. And how about parting advice?
Don't let anyone tell you have to choose between making money and making a difference. You can have both, and you deserve both. We all do.
I believe that's true. I know it's true. That's exactly how I have had the blessing to live for many years. But it's taken me a long time also to realize I need to take care of myself in the process. And that's also not at odds with success. No. You can take care of yourself, and you can take care of the people around you, and you can grow a successful, profitable business. So Lisa, thank you so much for your wisdom and insight today. It's just been an absolute pleasure to hear from you. And I think it's going to add a lot of value to those that listen and watch.
Thanks.
All right, that's it. Facebook, we are going to wrap you all up. If you have any questions or comments, whether you're watching this now or you're watching it later, leave those comments below. I'll put a link to Lisa's information and book as well if you want to check that out. And then this podcast.
Check us out on LinkedIn. We've got a newsletter, Work on Purpose. It's a great thing to share with yourself, your staff.
Awesome. So we'll check that out as well. And then I don't have any more podcasts today. Usually I do a couple today, but I'm just doing one. So
Nice.
Thanks for being here. If you're on Facebook, we will see y'all later.
Hey, I hope this video has helped you with some tips and ideas to build a business that lasts. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss out on the next videos that we roll out. And more importantly, for some awesome free resources, head over to our website at buildingabusinessthatlasts.com. You can get a free copy of my book there where I tell you how I have built an agency that's grown year over year for the last 20 years in a row. So go grab that, buildingabusinessthatlasts.com, and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Thanks. We'll see you soon.